and welcome to DM Talks, where we're gonna talk about chess principles. 8 important chess principles you must and should use if you want good results in chess. I've tried to make these 8 principles easy to access, easy to use, and hopefully easy to remember when you're sitting at the board thinking about what to do. These principles should guide you during the game. The first principles we have is like a beginner's principle, but of course what I realized when I became an IM was that all these principles, they are much more important than you think. Usually they get blurred by all this tactical noise that sort of messes with your head, and so you don't realize that these principles are really important. The problem with most principles is they're not really easy to use. So this is I'm really trying to make it accessible for your game when you're playing. So let's jump into it. We have a game from the French league, Gata versus Andrei Skikachev. And Kamsky starts with d4. And here we come with the first principle, which is whenever you don't know what to do, centralize. Centralize, centralize, centralize. Most of what happens in a chess game goes around in here, in these squares here. And maybe also we make a big yellow thing here. This is more or less the center. This is where most of the action takes place. Often things will intervene, but unless the pawn structure is blocked, always think about the center. It's much more important than you think, even in the end game, but of course in the opening where you're trying to improve your influence in the center. Of course there are some weird players who likes to play sort of a back rank counter-attacking play with like the modern or something, but in general that's not the most healthy strategy. So if you don't know what to do, centralize. Another principle that is very important is to develop. You don't want your ship to be sunk in the harbor. You want them to get out there and get influence in the center. So black is easy, get the knight out, already also fighting for the center here. White, this does not really fight for center, but it does develop the knight to a good square. This is also what you want to do with your pieces. You want to get them to good influential square. That's not a principle, that's just a good guideline. Black e6, continue the fight for d5 and get ready to get the bishop out. White plays the London system. Kamsky likes to play the London system. Get the bishop out to an active square where it does another thing. At the moment this pawn is only covered by one piece, which is the queen, so it attacks weaknesses. And this is another important principle. When there is a we will see that principle many times in this game. When there is a weakness, you should try to attack it if it's possible. And of course, if you're the defender, you should try to defend it. You could say that sort of more or less always. c5. And again, we are fighting for the center. Black is trying to get more influence in the center, preventing white from dominating here. And with the knight, he's attacking here and centralize. White continues develop. This is a sort of a development move. Both it covers d4, so fights for the center and get ready to push the bishop out to some square here. Black decided to exchange. The problem of exchanging is sort of not a principle. It's more like something you should be very aware of, what to exchange, what not to exchange, which pieces remain, which disappears. What disappears is not as important as what remains. And how do they fight for the center? How well developed are you? If you sort of exchange off all your active pieces, you will not be very well developed. So that's another problem. So and white takes back, keeps on having a good center control. Black develops. It's not a very active move, but it does develop the bishop. White continues to develop, takes over this square and this square. Not that it's important right now, but it's important to know. We see that they all do something to either develop or fight for the center. B6, another move here to get ready to maybe play this move or maybe play this move to fight for the subs. This should be this one, to fight for the center in this diagonal. We see that the white squares has been so slightly weakened, and white starts to attack weaknesses. We see that black played c5 here and moved this, which means this is slightly weakened, so he's getting ready to use this as a flank attack. This is not doing something for the center, but it makes sense also because the position is rather stable. There's no dynamics, and we will get back to dynamics in a second. Black decided to exchange here. This is and maybe a good idea, maybe not a good idea. The thing is, he does avoid this bishop staying on the board. It often can be a good bishop attacking here from this square. Now it gets exchanged off, but it does take one tempo, and like we said before, development is important. That means tempo is also important. If you give away too much time to the opponent, most of your moves should have a purpose. Here, of course, it is to exchange white's good bishop, but it does cost time. But it's not really a bad move. White takes and knight goes to the rim. In general, you don't want your knight on the rim, but there are a lot of exceptions, and that goes for a lot of. So you cannot make hard rules about anything in chess, but you can make general guidelines and principles that will guide your decisions. White exchanges, castles, and this is another very important principle: king safety. You want your king to be safe, and often, if you could, you would like your opponent's king to be unsafe, of course. Like you could attack his king, but in general, you want your king safety to be. If your king is not safe, then that's often the most important feature of the position. That is so it's a very, very important principle. King safety. Some people are not afraid to get mated, but in general you should be. And black does the same, castle to the same side as white to feel safe here. Another thing that is not a principle but it's important is also with the sort of centralize and influence in the center is space. In general, you would like to have more space than your opponent because that makes your pieces, they can maneuver more easily if they have more space. White plays a3. By the way, if you have more space, you want to keep more space, and that is also you want to avoid having this exchange. So maybe white was a little bit afraid of this move or to get this bishop exchange, so he plays a3 and make a loophole here. This is not really, we could say that the opening is more or less over now. It's not a theoretical position, it's just a early middle game where they are fighting for good squares for the pieces and so on. In general, you would like to do something, but at the moment we can see that it's a rather stable position, and in stable position you have to sort of look into the structure more than activity. In general, you want to be as active as possible. That's also a principle. If you can be active, you in general you want to be active. Queen c8. That is actually fighting a little bit for the center. The queen was not doing much on d8, and we see that the white squares here, you can just feel it, that they are important. The white squares bishop has been exchanged off, so you want more influence on these squares, and black is putting it on a white square. It's raining down here, but of course you want to put it here and have this more expensive. Also, he's probably preparing a minority attack over here. You could say something like you would do something like this, and start to try to see if you can make a weakness on black. If there's no weaknesses, you have to create something to attack it. So c3, defending and taking away squares from black. Queen b7, again the same principle, fighting for the center, and he has the plan of b5. So what's the feature of this position? It is that black is probably has some chances to get something going on the queen side. White has more chances on the king side, where he have more space, mostly due to more control, more pieces over here, but also because the open file is important. So he starts to develop and try to create an attack on the queen side. Knight c7, the knight was not doing anything on a7, so it starts to eye this square. White immediately play this move, and that is a concrete threat. And that's another principle. Maybe it's not a principle, maybe it's more than a guideline, but see the threat. And the threat here is to take here and take here in general. It might not be working completely, but it is rather important. You don't want to take back with the pawn, and then it would be a problem because your bishop would be hanging. So this pawn here is now de facto hanging. Also, you're actually threatening this move because of the pin here, and also always be wary of pins. So rook here, defending the pawn, and white goes f4. So that is a multi-purpose move. It does increase the control over the center, but it's maybe also preparing to attack with f5 and opening the file. And we see that we already have this knight here. d6, okay, black got really tired of that knight standing there and get rid of it. Knight d4, where it is attacking here, and we see that there is a pin again, which is a bit annoying for black. So, and black goes here, and queen here, just developing and getting the rooks connected is usually a good idea. This, you can say, this is a little bit passive, but black is fortifying his defensive position. He's foreseeing the threat, so he's playing prophylactically there. No principles, just good moves, and exchanging also makes sense, but it does bring the queen closer to the king side. Here black starts to panic a little bit. The position is okay. It's not like white is really this king is really in danger. So your king safety is more or less okay. You just have to find out what to do about f5. One idea could be to play d5 and take and play f6, for instance. So maybe exchange everything you can, play f6, queen f7, knight c7, something like. So we should see a sample line here. If you go something like this, maybe something like this is okay for black. You got this pawn weak, but you will be able to cover everything on the e file, and still you might someday get some minority attack going, and your king is safe now. You can put your queen here, and nothing really bad is going to happen unless you mess it up. So that was one way to play it. G6 does sort of weaken the dark squares a little bit. So that's but it does prevent f5. And white goes on with bring another piece into attack, and that is, again, that's actually a developing move. The rook was not doing much here, and we can say that black is white is essentially sort of abandoning any kind of play on the queen side. Rook d7, and we can see that black has sort of gone into passive mode here, which is always a little bit dangerous. But he's getting out of the pin, and apparently he believes that his bishop is better than black's bishop. So here he decides not to exchange this, and I think in general you have to exchange this and play d5. to get some more space. Again, space is important. And here, in general, you don't want to weaken your structure. Structure is important. Pawn structure is another principle. You want to have a healthy pawn structure if possible. But sometimes there are overruling principles, especially when you make the distinction between dynamics and statics. When a position is dynamic, then pawn structure is not as important, and material is not as important. Then the activity of the pieces, the ability to carry out threats is much more important. Well, when it's a static position, then all these structural things are very important and should be at the top of your priority list. So there's a very big difference, and that's very confusing, because when is it static and when is it dynamic, and sometimes it goes from static to dynamic and from dynamic to static, and you don't know, and so that's one of the difficult things to learn in chess. So I didn't say it was going to be easy. I just say I'm going to try to guide you here with the different principles. So here white, and this is another principle, attack weaknesses. We are going to, and we see that black's king is starting to feel a little heat here. We have this knight who might be able to join the attack. We have this rook who's a part of the thing, this rook, this bishop, and this queen. So white's got, well, I'll make all them the same color so we can see all the attacking pieces. So white's got all the pieces in the attack, more or less. So black has to be careful. He has a nice structure, it's fine here, but white is starting to pile it up. b5, black is desperate to get some counterplay on the queen side. White just ignores it, and that's another thing that's important to remember is when the king is not safe, it overrules other principles like material or development and centralizing and so on. It doesn't matter if you get mated. Being aware of this, and now you have to see the threat, and that's not so easy to do. Here we can see that, okay, there is a threat. Black can see that. This one is threatened, winning a pawn. So you don't really want that to happen. So he takes, opening the file here, and we see that white's structure is now, he's sure to at least end up with an isolated pawn here. But on the other hand, it starts to look dangerous as well. And black says, okay, nothing to see here yet, so I'm not afraid. And here comes the other piece, and that's really now it's starting to become really terrifying, right? Because this one could go anywhere, and you're starting to get really nervous when you're black here. I would be too, and I think he's already in serious trouble. d5. And he should probably have played d5 long ago to avoid the knight from entering the game, because here white can sort of say, okay, but it doesn't matter you're threatening. He can see that this is threatening, but this one threatens mate, as again, the king's safety overrules everything else. And you take back, and here comes this move, boom, and this was probably hard to see for black, but it's winning more or less instantly. So you should calculate these kind of things. Calculation is not a principle. It can guide you to calculate well, but it cannot guide you where to put your pieces and what to aim for, which is the sort of the subject of this video. So taking here, nice move, sort of attack the weaknesses. The weakness here is black's king, but there's also some other features of the position. One of them is that after this move, we have a double attack. And again, we could say this is the principle of prefer activity when you can. And he takes here, check. So you always have to expect attack. And the other piece comes here, and white's attack just goes through. White is threatening the rook, and if the queen moves, comes queen h6 and queen h7, and black is mated. So Very nice. Black resigned here. Very nice. Nice game by Kamsky. Decisive was not having one of his best day. So, what was the principles? Develop, king safety, centralize, attack weaknesses, see the threat. And this was where sort of Black failed to do. It can also be very difficult. Pawn structure is sometimes important, but it depends on if the position is dynamic or static. If it's dynamic, then pawn structure is much less important than piece activity and the ability to carry out threats. And of course, you should generally prefer activity. I hope this video on principles can help you a little bit when you're in doubt. You will centralize, you will develop, you will look after your king, and so on. This was GM Talks. Thank you for watching. And if you like this format, please become a subscriber and so on, because we usually use this format for the entertaining videos or the instructive videos. I don't know if they're entertaining. That's for you to judge. Thank you.